some parts of this country, it is still raining. Even within Kampala, you may find one area it's starting to rain, the other it has stopped raining. But whatever it is, I think as Ugandans now we know we have two rainy seasons. And of course, we have the March to May, then again August to December around that. So you expect rainfall, and it shouldn't be an encumbrance or a reason as to why you've not made it to your destination. There could be some few excuses, but I think also the road, the jam that really happens when it rains, those are all things that are predictable and you can know, you expect them to be. So hopefully it has not hindered your arrival to your workstation. Once again, I'm Robert Chirabo-Nyonyintono, and this is Good Morning Uganda Extra. This morning we are going to be discussing something that Friday, by closure of business, it had raised people's eyeballs, wondering, how do we wake up and say we have accepted the use of marijuana and cat? By Friday, the Constitutional Court, you see a number of headlines going as the Constitutional Court in Kampala has repealed, that is the Narcotic, Drug and Psychotropic Substance Control Act of 2015, which among others prohibited that is the sale and use of several narcotic drugs in the country that include marijuana and cat, normally known as Mira. Now, this followed a group or an organization of Wakiso Mira Growers and Dealers Association Limited, which filed, that is to the Constitutional Court, a petition in 2007. Now they had gotten their victory. That is after how many years? 2017. That is when they filed this. And it was on Friday, 2023, when justices of the Constitutional Court came up with the decision. Now yesterday, the judiciary, the Constitutional Court, released a statement, and this is what it said. I'll just be very brief. The use of marijuana not legalized by the Constitutional Court. That was the heading. The use of marijuana not legalized by the Constitutional Court. Joining me this morning is Counsel Kahuma Terry Isaac, with whom we are going to be discussing so much regarding this twist of events, and also now, what does this mean if we have the Constitutional Court coming up and nullifying this? And of course, later we shall give some of the details as to why this happened. Of course, one being and major is lack of quorum. You're most welcome to the studios.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here with you once again. I remember the last show we had was just a few months ago. And of course, current events and troublesome legal topics such as this one always bring us back together to demystify these things for the public to understand. Yes.
Now, I know in law, language, English means a lot.
Yes.
One word can change. Now here we have repealing, nullifying, and then we have not legalized. Let's break these three phrases or words. What do they mean in law? One, the Constitutional Court has repealed. Say, Act, the 2015, that is narcotics and drugs plus other substances.
Narcotic drugs and psychotropic substances.
Now, when we talk about repealing in law, what do we mean?
To repeal something, it's in my, all of us lawyers have our different kinds of interpretation of the law, but there is that general standard. So to repeal means to make a change into that particular act or clause. To repeal, it's kind of related to amending. So when they say they have repealed, meaning they have made a change, they have altered something concerning that particular legislation or that particular law or act. That kind of thing. Now, when you look at something like not legalized means that it's not allowed, because the word legal means to allow. Now, when they say marijuana is now no longer, it's still not legalized, meaning that I'll go back to the genesis of this. When the 5 judges of the Constitutional Court came out to nullify that act, that means that they were doing it in response to a petition that was brought up by the Wakiso growers and dealers, the people who are growing Mira and marijuana. Now, many people took that out of context. That's why the press release by the judiciary came out and they said that many people have been talking on different social media platforms and everything. So they took it out of context and then they said marijuana is legalized, meaning it's now legal. Use of marijuana and legal, which is commonly known as cat, is now legalized. So they took it out of context. That's why you said in the law, even a small, you know how you can have something like act, if you put an S, even a letter can change so much. Even in, for example, we have submissions. A small change in an S or an A, any word can change something. So the fact that they took it out of context and now said marijuana is legal, so the public came into a very big uproar and they were wondering, is it legal? Can we now use it? I don't know what's happening to our judges, that kind of thing. So there was a back and forth. So I hope I've answered your question.
Okay.
Yes.
Now with that definition, let's go back right from the background. We have a group that is Wakiso Mira Growers and Dealers Association Limited that filed a petition to the Constitutional Court. That was in 2017, quite some time. But of course, you know, our challenges with the judiciary. And it has taken that some time to have the 5 judges of the Constitutional Court. Because these people had grounds on which they filed.
Yes.
And I was trying to look at their grounds, actually. What reasons did they give court? And they came up and said, the dealers in Mairunji, these are the things they looked at. The dealers in Mairunji also argued that they were aggrieved over the manner in which the law seeks to prohibit the cultivation, possession, consumption, sale, purchase, warehousing, distribution, transportation, exportation, importation, and other dealings in the crop, urging that this decision was taken without clear scientific evidence, but also as stakeholders, they were not consulted. Now, when we look at what the judges depended on, we have the 5 justices that include Deputy Chief Justice Richard Butera, Justice Stephen Musota, Justice Muzamiru, Mutarungwa Kibedi, Justice Irene Moliagonja, and Justice Monica Mugenyi. Now, according to the panel of these justices that we've talked about, they looked more on corrum.
Yes.
And what they're bringing forward for them to have passed their judgment as of Friday, they said that at the stage of voting the bill, to be more specific and quote particularly, the ruling of procedures in Parliament requires a quorum before any bill is passed. According to the rules also provided for what constitutes of quorum and the obligation of the Speaker to confirm that at this stage of voting, the bill must receive sufficient number of votes in order for it to be lawfully passed. So basically, that was their area, and basing on that, said no, there was no quorum. But all this said, one thing that comes to my mind. We know there's a right procedure for law to be passed. But I want to try and look at where do morals and legality of the law meet? Or do they stand independent?
Well, when you look at morals and legality, we must look at society in general. Society is the genesis of everything of humankind. Now, the laws and morals, how we normally have here, that you must respect your elders. Now, start with a moral bit. I can't pass in between elders when they are talking. I must, maybe for the girls in African tradition, they must kneel down as they're greeting their elders. So that is morality. But it may not be set into law for me to kneel down as I'm greeting my elders. Now, I'm just giving you a very robust example. When you look at the law, the law comes in to put in checks and balances, and they must be respected. That's how the law comes into place. If they say marijuana and Mira are not legalized, meaning if you're ever caught using marijuana and Mira on the streets of Kampala, they're going to arrest you. So even if someone was basing on this information that came out on Friday, that the Constitutional Court has now nullified that act, the Psychotropic Control Act is now nullified, you can now use marijuana. Someone can, based on that, they can tell police, I'm obligated, I have a right to do it. So a moral is expected of you, and it's expected that you should respect what cultural norms have been in existence. Your grandfather used it, your father used it, you should also use it. But a law is something where there are consequences. The law puts into place consequences in that if you do not respect what has been put into statute, then you're going to either pay a fine or face jail time.
Well, we are still looking at actually now what came out from the judiciary, titled use of marijuana not legalized by the Constitutional Court. And of course on Friday we had what was very clear, that well, it had been granted a leeway. But when we look through this statement, and allow me to go through it very briefly, I'll summarize where necessary. The attention of the judiciary has been drawn to the different media articles claiming that the Constitutional Court, in its judgment in constitutional petition number that of 2017, delivered on May 5th, this very year, legalized the use of marijuana. This is to clarify that that is not the correct interpretation of the decision of the Constitutional Court as claimed in many articles. It is indeed true that in 2015, the Parliament of Uganda passed the Narcotic Drugs and Psychotropic
Control Act.
Substance Control Act, therein after referred to as the Act, which sets the control of various drugs, including marijuana, cat, locally known as mairungi, among others. The Act repealed Section 26, 29, 20, there's 44, and 49, 60. And 60. Now, this is where I want to get it clearly. The judiciary points out that much as this could be, but there's still another law that empowers the National Drug Authority
and Policy Act.
That is now what we are going to be using, or what police can use still to
put stringent measures.
And hold these people accountable. Now, what does this mean? Which one then is supreme?
To answer that question, I think I'll first point out that, you see, the law is supposed to be clear and cut, like crystal clear. The mistake came in with the judiciary. When the Constitutional Court gave this decision and then nullified the previous act of 2015, they should have, still in their judgment, or maybe after their judgment, they should have come out with this press statement immediately after. Because in between Friday and Tuesday, that's a long period of time for a lot to happen. So many people could have been put in prison, or so many people could have done a lot of abuse of these substances. So I think this press statement came out, I think, because of the huge public uproar. So meaning that if people were not so as excited, or if people were not so commentative about this particular legislation being passed, then that means that they will not have maybe released this press statement. So I think it's also upon us, officers of the judiciary, because lawyers, judges, we're all part of the judiciary. Whenever we come up with judgments, we should also be able to come up with a follow-up statement saying that much as we have nullified the act, the major act which is putting a stop to, which is accepting maybe the growing and production of marijuana, it doesn't mean that the use of marijuana is now accepted, if you get what I mean. So now, the National Drug sorry, I lost my chain of thought. The National Drug Policy and Authority Act. When they say that the former Act of 2015 repealed sections 26, 27, 44, 47, and 60,
yes.
It means that the former act that was repealed, which was the one being petitioned, has now been removed. So now they're now going to the backup one, which is the National Drug Policy and Authority Act. So there are certain provisions, the ones which they said were repealed, which was from 26 to 60. 26, 27, 44, and 60. They now give guidelines on how marijuana is going to be distributed and conducted here in Uganda. For example, if you look at 26 and 27, section 26 of this act states that you cannot use marijuana unless using it for medicinal purposes. Because the section clearly states that if you use marijuana, it's still prohibited, or Mira. So they wanted to clear the air that much as we have followed the petition and nullified the previous act, the Psychotropics and Substance Control Act, we still have this one, which the police can now enforce. Yes. So that's why they came out with a press statement saying that, you know what, now marijuana still is not prohibited in Uganda. It's not legalized. Well,
still going to the same document towards the end, the grounds of the petition included, among others, lack of quorum by Parliament during the passing of the Act, which the Constitutional Court looked at, said if there is no quorum, no matter how good your law is. Many remember when we had the anti-homosexual, what happened when there was lack of quorum, and that is how it went. But the ahead. In its findings, the Constitutional Court agreed with the petitioners and declared the Act null and void for lack of quorum by Parliament, passing it. That's clear. The annulment of the Act does not invalidate the provisions of Section 26, 29, 47, 49, and 60, Cap 1B and C, of the National Drug Policy and Authority Act, which is now applicable law in regards to the regulation and use of restricted substances. Therefore, the substances previously restricted under the National Drug Policy and Act remain restricted. It is, now we are going to language. It is, however, imperative to note that Parliament still reserves the power to legalize on the same subject should it find it necessary. Now, where does this leave our brothers, the Wakiso Mira Growers and Traders Association Limited?
It's very interesting the way you break down everything. Now, I want to also explain the reason as to why the Constitutional Court brought up the issue of quorum. In accordance with Article 88 and 89, it gives us an insight on what is necessary for a bill to be passed by Parliament. When we look at the troublesome anti-homosexuality bill, which was now sent back by the President recently, the first one that was brought up in 2013, you remember the first one? So after the President passed it and everything, later the court reversed it and said that no, the quorum was not there and everything. So for a bill to be passed, a bill is just a discussion that happens within the legislators, which is in Parliament. When a bill is then, it starts from a normal discussion, it now is tabled into Parliament as a bill. We now say we want to bring up maybe the Metal Control Act or maybe the Anti-Homosexuality Act. So it starts as a bill. When it's then later passed, if it gets a lot of quorum basically means votes. If it gets so many votes in Parliament and everyone says aye, let's say it gets an overwhelming votes of about 95%, surely then that one is enough quorum for it to pass. So the judge of the Constitutional Court was saying that for the original act, which is the Psychotropics and Substances Control Act, the national, I don't know, that act still confuses me a lot because it's so long. But that original act that was repealed in 2015, if they're stating that, stated in the petition of the Wakiso growers and dealers, in their petition, they stated that this act does not have enough quorum. When it was originally a bill, it did not have enough quorum for it to have been passed. So they're stating that that's why it should be considered null and void. But to me, when I've been looking at this whole situation of marijuana and Mira being apparently legalized, the Wakiso growers and dealers of marijuana and Mira are basically looking at it in the economic sense. I don't know whether you were able to see that.
Definitely, it's all about economic.
So they're stating that if this act has been put into place, then it's going to limit us so much. It's so much of an encumbrance to our production of
They bring in,
marijuana.
we weren't consulted as stakeholders. Then they bring in its giving stringent guidelines on growing, cultivation, production, exportation, importation, and so much. But they're all about earnings, economy.
Yes. I recently did a video on my YouTube channel about this, and it got a lot of backlash, even from international stakeholders, because one of them got interested in what I had to say about it. And what was interesting was that she brought out a lot of facts. Marijuana is this, it's detrimental. So I like to stay neutral as a lawyer, because we need to be as objective as possible. So I think the judges of the Constitutional Court should have looked at, yes, the Wakiso growers and dealers are looking at the economical bit. Yes, it's important to the economy and the GDP. But how about the health of the people? So we must look at marijuana and Mira as a plant, or as two plants. Unfortunately, the plant has been demonized so much, and yet throughout history, it has been used for medicinal purposes. Marijuana and Mira are, at least, they are used in certain hospitals to treat certain patients. For example, when you look at cancer patients, they use small doses of marijuana. Even during COVID, people are using marijuana, people are growing it in their backgrounds, in their backyards rather. It has its medicinal purposes, but in small quantities. Now the problem comes in where we try and abuse it, because as human beings, sometimes we don't have the right control mechanisms, and that's where the law came in. So the law is, personally, I think the law was still as important as possible. Instead of the Constitutional Court nullifying that act, we should have amended it to talk about how much regulation is important for the use of marijuana.
But then the court doesn't amend.
Sorry?
The court doesn't amend.
Yes,
it has to come to Parliament. And if there was a petition before them, and they looked at grounds of the petitioners being valid, like lack of quorum, then I think their hands were caught. And what could, because I'm told and I know that you depend on facts presented.
Yes.
One friend of mine told me it's not the best lawyer who wins the case, but he who better presents their facts takes the day.
Yes.
So what they were looking at were facts presented to them that were very clear and obvious, that if there hasn't quorum, yes, the law is clear. If you don't have quorum, you don't have quorum, and then that can be repealed and cease to be.
And that was a very good angle that they actually came for, because by the time an act did not have enough quorum, when it was previously a bill, then that means that it was not even supposed to be there in the first place. That's why they say they have considered it now null and void. Now, in the press statement that you looked at, when they say that Parliament still reserves the right to come up with another piece of legislation and statutes, still to protect the use of marijuana and Mira, they are actually right. Because I will still take you back to the troublesome anti-homosexuality thing that we have been having. The first one was tabled as a bill, it was passed, it was signed by the president in 2014. It was now sent back and it was now considered null and void. We have again brought it back. So meaning that legislation in any sort of country, whether you're a senator in the US, whether you're an MP in Uganda, any form of parliament in any country has a right to bring back any act or any bill that they want to intend to become an act, as long as they see it fit at that particular time to address ever-growing trends of the law. Because most of these laws come up as society develops. That's why I began saying that society is the one that comes up with the laws.
Well, I'll go for a short break and we'll return, still discussing the same topic, and of course the legalities here and there, more so when we see clarification from the judiciary and kind of like a twist in things that they had been perceived by a number of people in Uganda. We'll return shortly.
Live from UBC Studios in Kampala, this is Good Morning Uganda Extra.
Jerry con! Jerry con! Hey, Master Blaster! Touch him, man! Bang Jerry con with muscle! Those ones who say go for you only. Mundava! Best movies I teach you. When I'm going to the squad, because of the cover is very far. Is you serious? Is serious you? What yeah? You step it on it. Add kilometers to your legs. And you get your sugar. We buy meat from Umaru. And Umaru refuses to give you enough meat. Mama! Show him that they don't joke with you. Umaru, Jerry card.
Okukakaluka n'okulungi kwetaagako omuntu akuyambako n'olwekyo tujja kukuteerawo embeera esaanidde osobole okukola ekisinga awamu teri kitulema. Juko.
Yo.
Check the shopping, man. What's your secret?
Uganda, haven't you heard of the parish development model PDM?
Yes, I did, but I thought it was just a talk.
No, Sebatia. It is real. I and a few friends together formed a circle, accessed money from the PDM, invested in a portrait project, and now things are moving.
Juko. I thought I was one of your friends.
You are.
But you left me behind.
I didn't leave you in poverty. What you do, just visit your LC2 chairperson and your parish chief and start the process of economic transformation. Just like that. The parish development model is an initiative from the government of Uganda through the Ministry of Local Government designed to transform all lives of Ugandans for the better. PDM, my parish, my development, my life.
Live from UBC Studios in Kampala, this is Good Morning Uganda Extra.
Welcome back. It is Good Morning Uganda Extra. A very interesting topic here. Of course, we'll talk about Narcotics and Drug Control Act, and of course what happened on Friday. That was the 5th of this very month when the Constitutional Court, 5 judges there, nullified that is the law that had been in place, one of the laws, because we still have another act. And of course I'll ask my friend here, what does it mean when we have seemingly similar laws trying to regulate the same cause? Because now maybe it will require someone again to go to court and challenge the current one that police is going to be using, that of the National
the National Drug Policy and Authority Act.
Yes, because now if you challenge that of 2015 and they went to court in 2017, got their ruling just on Friday last week, now one would still. So what does it mean having same laws? And most of the times when we've had these bills in Parliament, even the current anti-homosexuality bill, we still have voices that are saying, but I think this is addressed somewhere else. The penal code, clearly we don't need another law. There are many laws. We've had challenges. Is it the marriage and divorce, the domestic, that has been on shelf over every time we make attempts. But someone stands on the floor, someone advises and says,
this is already addressed.
This is already addressed
in an earlier act.
In an earlier act. So what does this mean? Because one would say if this had been nullified, then it would be done. We don't have a law. But still there is another law that factors in and regulates the same thing.
I think this was a very smart move that the judiciary made. Because like I said earlier, in life we must always have a give and take. If it was so dangerous that if we do not have any regulation concerning marijuana or the use of Mira, then we're going to leave our society in chaos. Because much as, yes, the the Wakiso growers and dealers had a point in terms of the economy. The fact that for them that is their livelihood, that is their source of living. They have a right to grow and distribute and produce and export their Mira and marijuana. It is now the reason why they are bringing their petition, which led to the nullification of this act. Now, when you talk about there being a gray area in between these two acts, one has now been nullified as of recent, and now one is being left. The reason why the judiciary has left this one standing, the National Drug Authority and Policy Act, it means that they want there to be some form of restriction, some form of regulation. Because you took it back to the point of being, is it a moral or is it a law? A law must always be there in place to put consequences in that if you're found abusing this substance, because we know its benefits and we know its dangers. If you're found misusing marijuana and Mira, then you're going to be put into trouble. And that's where the offenses and penalties come in under Section 60 of the of the National Drug Policy and Authority Act. So Section 60 comes in to state that there are consequences for you being in possession and use of marijuana if you're not licensed, because they're actually they state who should have licenses, they state why you should have a license, and they state the reason as to why you should deal in marijuana and Mira. When I looked at that act, I looked at the fact that they specifically and strongly emphasize that it should be used for medicinal purposes. At least it should be used for purposes under which it's beneficial to society. Meaning that if we're allowing you to use Mira and marijuana, it should only be used for a purpose which is benefiting mankind. Yeah, I think you've now understood it. So that is why, yes, they have made null and void the National Drugs, Substances and Psychotropics Act of 2015. It's now thrown away. But even with the petition of the Wakiso growers and dealers being accepted, that okay, now we've allowed you to now deal and produce your marijuana and Mira, still we should regulate in form of licenses, in form of the reason as to why you're using marijuana and Mira. We should also regulate to who we are giving it out to. Yes, and also that there are penalties there. In accordance with Section 60, which they have now emphasized in that press statement, it is now stated that if you're found in possession of marijuana when you're not supposed to be in possession of it, then you're going to go for a jail term of about 5 years, or even pay a penalty of about 1 million Uganda shillings. So the penalties are quite heavy. If you're not licensed to do something, now in this case to actually be in possession of Mira and marijuana, then you're going to face the strong hand of the law. That means police has a right to use this act that they are now relying on. Yes.
Well, very interesting there when we try to break down some of the legal technicalities that have come up with the nullification, and of course clearly saying we've not legalized. Now, time is flying, but to the ordinary person, a person watching us who had picked so much into this, because we must understand, one, the economic purposes. Mila and marijuana, it is a business, a standing one. That's why you saw the attention on social media that was given to such a ruling on Friday. And of course now we are seeing how still more attention given actually to the statement that has come up, that has been released by the judiciary, that was released yesterday evening. Now, what to the person watching us, this statement, those in the marijuana business, those in Mira business, they even talked of importation when they were giving their reasons. So how should they move forth with such?
I think the very people who brought this petition and the very ones who made the former act to be null and void, I think if they want a safe and smooth running of their businesses, they should move in accordance with the National Drug Authority and Policy Act, the one which now the judiciary is relying on. Because if they don't move in accordance with that, they are still going to face friction with the police and the policy implementers. Because most people may not be aware of this, but under the Constitution, we have Article 126, which talks about independence of the judiciary, meaning that in all the arms of the government, we have three. We have the executive, we have the legislative, and we have the judiciary. Now, the executive is the one that governs any government. The legislation is the one that thinks about any form of statute or law or legislation and tables it. The judiciary now implements it. Now the police works so closely with the judiciary, and they're the ones that enforce any act and law. That is why there was so much contention when it came to the Anti-Homosexuality Act, because the bill that was sent to the president and the one that was tabled in parliament, they were looking at so many strong forms of legislation that anyone who is found in aggravated homosexual acts is going to face a long term in prison. They were even debating that even the death penalty may be something that is very stringent. So back to my point, if the Wakiso dealers and growers want to have a smooth running of their businesses, much as their petition has come up to nullify this previous act, the new or the act which has already been in existence but silent, which is the National Drug Policy and Authority Act, it should have procedures under which these growers can now safely grow, produce, export, and deal in their marijuana and Mira. To the general public, I think this was still good, what the judiciary did to come up with this press statement. However, I feel like they came too late. I feel like it's not too late, but late still. Because if something as contentious as this comes out, you should be able to release a statement there and then, at least even if it's on a Sunday, but people should know that, hey, okay, I heard about, if it's a lay person, yes, I heard that the petition has now nullified an act, but now is it legal to now use marijuana? So if something as contentious as this comes out, don't wait for the public to first now think to themselves that, okay, now we can safely use marijuana. There should be some statement following that. By the way, even if we have come up with this, there's an act that talks about this, so hold your horses. Yes.
Well, I want to thank you so much, Terry. Thank you so much for your time.
Yes.
And of course, trying to break that down for our viewers to better understand. It is only within the law that you can now grow marijuana. And the law is very clear. It is only for medicinal purposes. So those in that business, well, there is a law still governing that, and please do not be caught off guard. Understand, read the law. But also, I think they still have room.
I think they still have room.
They still have room?
It may not really be for medicinal purposes, but it's a major one that is really emphasized. And what they are really trying to aim for is...
They still have room to petition.
They still have room to petition.
To petition, yes.
And I think the whole point of them stating that, by the way, there's another act which is still regulating the use of marijuana. They're trying to streamline its use to only productive purposes. So they're scared that, okay, fine, how are these Wakiso dealers and growers going to sell their product? Because yes, if we're now giving them a right to sell it, export it, they may claim they are selling it to buyers who are going to use it for the right purposes. But then they may, on the side, sell it to different people, like which has already been happening, which may worsen things actually, which may make things worse. So they want to bring that form of regulation that it should only, maybe perhaps they may amend even this act which has been put into place to better place where marijuana and Mira should be directed. If you're exporting it, to who? If you need to get a license, what do you need to get a license? What are the requirements? So I think they need to come out in the clear instead of leaving it gray. We have now repealed this, but now there's also this. There should be some form of give and take that can encompass everyone but still live within the law.
Well, just all I can say is please stay safe, be law abiding, and marijuana and Mira, if abused, if in the wrong hands, they're very detrimental. When you go to the different rehabilitation centers we have, there is clear evidence there. Many people are on the streets. Many people have lost their jobs. Their destiny has been destroyed because of these two substances. Have a lovely day. God bless you.